one World Trade Center that is the one where the impact.
The cause of India's freedom for many years.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
America is a constant work in progress.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks, and in this bulletin we'll get you updates on stories developing around the world. A record-breaking heatwave continues to grip Canada and the west coast of the United States. In Canada, over 200 people have lost their lives, those deaths likely linked to the grueling heat. Meteorologists say the heatwave is only just getting started in the Pacific Northwest. The National Weather Service says that it's being driven by an extremely powerful and unusual heat dome. We'll get you all the details, but first, let's take a look at all the top headlines. A top US military chief warns of impending civil war in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of US troops. General Austin Miller says a civil war is certain and should be a concern for the rest of the world. Germany completes its troop pullout from Afghanistan after nearly 20 years of deployment. 59 German soldiers have been killed since 2001 in the course of their service in the country. Russian President Vladimir Putin slams the US and the UK over last week's warship incident in the Black Sea. He calls it an act of provocation by the United States and Britain, accusing them of failing to respect the choice of the Crimean people. The US House of Representatives passes a bill to remove from the Capitol building statues of Confederate leaders who backed slavery in the US. The bill also passed last year, but was then rejected by the Republican-controlled Senate. A massive war of words breaks out in the House of Commons in London. Britain's opposition leader Keir Starmer accuses Prime Minister Boris Johnson of trying to defend former Health Secretary Matt Hancock. Johnson responds by saying that a new Health Secretary was appointed in just one day. In a drastic turnaround after nearly a year of conflict, forces in Tigray take full control of Mekelle. Rebel soldiers claim to have sent government troops fleeing. We begin today with that story of a top United States general warning of civil war in Afghanistan after the US troop withdrawal is completed. General Austin Miller says a civil war is certain and it should be a concern for the rest of the world. He added that it was important to reduce violence if the conflict-hit country is to achieve a political solution.
It's a political settlement that brings peace to Afghanistan. And it's not just the last 20 years, it's really the last 42 years. And the political settlement is something that, as we start talking about how does this all end, the way it must end for the Afghan people is something that revolves around a political solution. I've also said that if you don't reduce the violence, that political solution becomes more and more difficult.
At the Pentagon, spokesman John Kirby agreed that violence is too high in Afghanistan. However, he reiterated that the US withdrawal will continue on schedule.
The withdrawal of combat forces from Afghanistan is over. We will have two new mission sets at DoD. One is to have a presence in Kabul that is sufficient to the task of protecting our diplomacy there. And two, to have a relationship with Afghanistan, a new bilateral relationship with Afghan forces that is designed to help continue their needs for competency and capability in the field.
Meanwhile, Afghan civilians are taking up arms against the Taliban as US troops continue to withdraw. Hundreds of mujahideen, along with other armed civilians, gathered in the mountains of Parwan province. They pledged to back the Afghan armed forces. Armed militias have become a common sight in Afghanistan as the Taliban mounts its offensive against the Afghan government. In fact, the Taliban captured several key areas, including a town on the Afghanistan border with Tajikistan. Only last Friday, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani was here in Washington, meeting with President Biden at the White House. While the US leader vowed to help Afghanistan's social and economic development, it remains unlikely that Washington will provide any military aid to the Afghan army. This as US and NATO forces are set to exit Afghanistan completely by September the 11th. The withdrawal comes after a peace deal was negotiated between the Taliban and Washington, but talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban in Doha are yet to make any progress. Donald Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, will not be allowed to practice law in the state of New York. A court there has suspended his license to practice law in the state, saying he made false and misleading claims that Donald Trump had lost the 2020 presidential election due to widespread fraud. The court ruled that Giuliani made demonstrably false and misleading statements when he was working as Donald Trump's attorney. In a 33-page ruling, the court said, and I quote, "These false statements were made to improperly bolster the respondent's narrative that due to widespread voter fraud, victory in the 2020 US presidential election was stolen from his client. Giuliani's conduct immediately threatens the public interest and warrants the interim suspension from the practice of law." The court also pointed out that Giuliani made numerous false statements about voting in Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, false claims that Donald Trump continues to make even to this day. Giuliani also leveled unsubstantiated allegations that hundreds of thousands of votes were improperly counted and included ballots from dead people. Giuliani had claimed that the investigation into his conduct violated his First Amendment rights to free speech. He claimed that he did not make false statements knowingly. The court rejected those arguments.
I feel personally worried for the country. I've been a lawyer for 50 years. I've never had a complaint. I've never had a problem. I believe that this is the real problem here is somebody's got to fix this double standard justice system, which is not America anymore. I mean, I might as well be in Iran or East Germany before the change. This is a one-sided decision, not based on evidence, based on newspapers. I haven't called a single witness. I can call 100 witnesses to support what I'm saying. and I'm ready to do it. I've practiced law for 50 years. I've put some of the most dangerous people in the world in jail. And I've been in some of the most difficult situations.
Donald Trump, of course, made multiple attempts to overturn the election result. Giuliani was one of the foremost mouthpieces for the 2020 Trump presidential campaign. He helped Trump file numerous lawsuits in several states, all of which failed. He continues to allege the Democratic Party rigged the election. The unsubstantiated claims played a key role in provoking Trump supporters when they took the U.S. Capitol building hostage and unleashed violence on Capitol Hill on January the 6th of this year. Staying on Capitol Hill, the Biden administration for its input on a Harvard University admissions lawsuit. The Biden administration will give its views on whether the justices should hear a challenge to the revered educational institution's consideration of race in undergraduate student admissions. For Voice of America, Connor Smith has more.
The U.S. Supreme Court is facing a case about Harvard University's admission policy that considers race in its selections. The High Court has asked the U.S. Justice Department for input. University of Kentucky professor Gregory Vincent says it's important for the court to seek the administration's views.
I think getting some sense of what the administration is thinking, particularly administration that has a focus on education, I think is interesting. And it's good that they're getting that viewpoint, especially when you're reviewing a recent precedent.
5 years ago, Vincent was a spokesperson at the University of Texas, Austin, when the school was sued over its affirmative action policies.
What we were able to persuasively argue is that diversity is a compelling interest in higher education, that all students benefit from a robust and diverse learning environment, that it was a national security imperative, and it advanced good business.
The attorney who represented a student against the University of Texas after she was denied admission said affirmative action is biased.
We have said in our briefs, and certainly we've said all along, that race is an odious classification. To do it for reasons that are not compelling and are not established by the evidence and were not the basis of decision is inappropriate.
The U.S. Supreme Court held then in 2016 that using race in admissions decisions is lawful. But now, those who support affirmative action are concerned that the High Court's 6-3 conservative majority could end it. Julie Park is an associate professor of education and advised Harvard on its defense. She says if the lawsuit against Harvard is victorious, it could have a devastating impact on minority students.
It would be disastrous for African-American, Latinx, indigenous communities within higher education, both at Harvard specifically, but then also writ large across the country, both in public institutions and private institutions.
If you take race out of the equation, it disproportionately impacts African-American students, Latino students, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. The traditional measures of so-called merit, like grades and test scores, disproportionately favor students who come from affluent backgrounds who go to high-resource schools.
The lawsuit is led by Edward Bloom, a legal strategist from Texas. Bloom enlisted a group of unnamed Asian American students in the suit. They say that affirmative action suppresses Asian American enrollment in favor of other minorities. But a 2020 survey showed that 70% of Asian Americans support affirmative action.
I've seen Asian Americans who are just confused. We're a diverse community in every way. And so I think you have a variety of reactions.
Vincent says there is a lack of evidence that Asian Americans are excluded in the admissions process. The justices have postponed the case, but didn't reject it.
But it would just send a message, which I think a troubling message, that this issue is still unresolved.
Connor Smith, VOA News, Washington.
Now, it's the end of June, so it's pretty warm here in Washington, D.C., but an absolutely intense heat wave continues to sweep across parts of the United States and Canada. The heat wave has sent temperatures soaring, prompting authorities to issue evacuation orders. It has scorched the entire Pacific Northwest. Temperatures in the cities of Seattle and Portland have caused power blackouts in the area. People continue to battle with the intense heat, with power companies warning of more outages. Schools and businesses were closed in many cities as the mercury hit triple digits in Fahrenheit. That's high 40s in Celsius. Some power cables even melted, causing disruption to streetcar and light rail services in Portland. Later today, US President Joe Biden is scheduled to chair a meeting with his officials about the heat wave and the impending summer wildfire season. Record-smashing temperatures have killed over 230 people in Canada's British Columbia. The province's chief governor, Lisa Lapointe, said that the death toll is likely to grow as the torrid heat continues. Similarly, at least 69 people have died in Vancouver in Canada in heat-related incidents. The authorities there say, although the exact reason behind the deaths is uncertain, the blistering heat is likely to have been a major reason.
We have tried, and our cities, usually those that are accustomed to heat like this, have municipal programs in place to protect people, calling on them to come to cooling centers, ensuring that we're checking up on the people we care about and the people that we know may well be in distress. Obviously, we can always, in hindsight, have planned to do better and do more. In this instance, I think the big lesson coming out of the past number of days is that the climate crisis is not a fiction, it is absolutely real.
Climate change continues to contribute to record-breaking temperatures rising all over the world. Meteorologists say the heat wave has been caused by an unusually intense dome of high pressure sitting above the region. Additionally, human-induced climate change has made things worse. Now, it's been a year since Beijing imposed a new national security law in Hong Kong. The harsh regulations have changed the city dramatically. Its political opposition has been crushed. Pro-democracy voices have been silenced. And as we'll hear in this report, many residents have fled overseas.
Around midnight on the 30th of June 2020, Beijing implemented a national security law in Hong Kong, effective immediately. 1 year later, 117 people have been arrested and 64 have been charged under the draconian law. Amnesty International has called the situation in Hong Kong a human rights emergency. The law has been used to target dissent, justify censorship, and arrests. The law was imposed to punish anything that Beijing deems as subversion, secession, colluding with foreign forces and terrorism, with up to life in prison. Back in 2020, the bill was drafted almost entirely in a closed-door meeting in Beijing that even Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam was not part of. And it came after months of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, which Beijing saw as an open challenge to its national sovereignty. A year on, while some have welcomed the law, many people feel their worst fears have been confirmed. The recent crackdown of authorities on pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily has raised several questions on freedom of speech in Hong Kong. With the city's pro-democracy leaders and activists arrested or forced into exile, Hong Kong is looking increasingly like other Chinese cities under Beijing's tight grip, subject to Chinese laws and censorship. On the 1st of July 2020, the anniversary of the city's handover from British rule to China, hundreds turned out to protest, clashing with riot police, who fired tear gas shells and rubber bullets. The police that day made their first arrests under the new national security law, and arrests haven't stopped since. In August 2020, over 200 police officers raided Apple Daily headquarters. Its top executives were arrested, including the owner, Jimmy Lai, who continues to be in jail. On the 6th of January this year, at least 53 lawmakers and opposition activists were arrested for subverting state power. Earlier this month, 500 police officers raided the Apple Daily newsroom for the second time. Top journalists were arrested and materials seized. Less than a week later, the newspaper announced it would shut down and seize all operations. Defending the raids, China said that the action against Apple Daily was in strict accordance with the law. Over the last year, the new law has drawn backlash from the global community. The United States revoked Hong Kong's special trade status and implemented the same restrictions that are in place for China. Several countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Germany, suspended extradition treaties with Hong Kong. Hong Kong was once an open international hub with a freewheeling press, rich protest culture and limited democracy. But the national security law has marked the end of all avenues left to voice dissent in the city of Hong Kong. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Despite China's objections, the United States and Taiwan have kick-started trade talks aimed at strengthening bilateral ties. Talks under a trade and investment framework agreement resumed after a 5-year pause. The talks were held virtually and were co-led by top trade officials from Washington and Taipei. They focused on enhancing the long-standing trade and investment relationship between the US and Taiwan. A range of issues, including supply chains, trade facilitation and digital trade, were all taken up. Taiwan's cabinet spokesman, Loping Cheng, described the talks as very fruitful and of critical importance for Taiwan's economy.
During the meeting, we expressed to the US that Taiwan hopes to sign a trade agreement eventually. We of course understand that signing a trade agreement between two countries, especially between countries like Taiwan and the US, with such an important and big trade volume, it takes a long time to talk and negotiate. But this meeting has made the relationship between the two even closer. We are willing to continue to work hard to build the foundation and proceed step by step towards our goal.
Taiwan also urged the US to expand supplies of COVID-19 vaccines and medicines by sharing technical know-how or authorizing the manufacture of vaccines and medicines on a contract basis. Taiwanese officials confirmed that both sides agreed to set up working groups to take discussions forward on issues including vaccine production.
Both sides agreed to simplify the review process of documents related to medical equipment so that consumers can have quicker access to needed medical equipment. We have reminded the US that we hope to enhance the supply of COVID-19 medication and vaccination through gradually increased collaboration and assistance in sharing of technology or licensed production.
In recent years, China ramped up its diplomatic, military and economic pressure on Taiwan. Beijing considers the self-governing island nation as part of its territory. China has time and again urged Washington to refrain from meddling in what it calls China's internal affairs by developing unilateral relations with Taipei. President Joe Biden, however, has pressed ahead. The US recently donated 2.5 million vaccine doses to Taiwan, a move that sparked a rebuke from Beijing. The Delta variant of COVID-19 is wreaking havoc in Australia. 4 major cities are now under stringent lockdown, and despite those restrictions, Sydney is witnessing a massive spike in cases. As you'll see in this report, the authorities are struggling to contain the spread of the Delta variant.
Australia extended its COVID-19 lockdown and social distancing measures to more of the country on Wednesday. 4 major cities are under a hard lockdown in a race to contain an outbreak of the highly contagious Delta variant. Around 1 in 2 Australians are under stay-at-home orders. The most populous state, New South Wales, reported 22 new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases on Wednesday, up slightly from the previous 2 days. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian warned citizens to be alert and follow the restriction orders.
So New South Wales is demonstrating a steady rate of cases at this stage. To date, our fears about huge escalation haven't materialised, and we certainly want to keep it that way.
The outback town of Alice Springs was also added to the list for stay-at-home orders after a potentially infected traveller used the airport. The first infection was detected in Sydney 2 weeks ago in a limousine driver who transported overseas airline crew. Meanwhile, less than 5% of the country's 20 million adult population has been fully vaccinated, leading to criticism of a sluggish national vaccination drive.
We're going to finish today in Alaska. Since 1955, the Homer Ice Racing Association has been organising races across a frozen lake every weekend for its members and spectators. How do you get started in ice car racing? Raphael de la Uz talks to one of the association's members. Take a look.
My first ever race was in a pink Ford Pinto, and they called it the Pink Pony. I was driving with my dad in town, and we drove past Beluga Lake, and we see these cars out on the lake. We tear on down. What's going on? What is this? We go down there. There's a sign. It says they're broadcasting on the radio. So we turn it on. Now we're listening. We're watching, and we're just riveted, staring over the dash, just loving it. This is so cool. Coolest thing I've ever seen. And then it says on the radio, we're looking for kid racers. I didn't dare hope. Nobody wants me to drive their car. Come on. I'm just a girl, a young girl. I don't really know anything. My dad says, well, let's just go. So we go in, and now I'm nervous. I'm afraid. But I walk in, and all of a sudden, every car driver is just leeching onto me. Come to my car. No, come to my car. Come try my car. And it was really a confidence boost. It felt very cool that they didn't care. They didn't care that I was young or I didn't know anything or that I was a girl doing what was supposed to be a man's sport. And so I walked in, and they said, hey, can you drive a stick shift? And I said, sorta. And they said, great, and shoved me in a car. It was incredible. I went out there, and I ran the entire race in first gear because I couldn't reach the clutch. So on the weekday, I'm at home, but I'm working. My husband has his own job he must go and do. I do everything that it requires to take care of the kids in the house. Sometimes that's doctor appointments. And it's in the back of my mind during race season what I'm doing and what time we can spare. We have our meetings Friday nights, and that really just starts it. Now you're in race mode from 6 p.m. on until Sunday evening. If it's not family oriented, I don't want to be there. So if it's not family bonding, if you're not together and you're not having a good time, why do it? We have long-standing members that were there in the 50s that are still here, but now it's their children and grandchildren and sometimes great-grandchildren coming down and being part of the association, and that's what's going to help keep us see into the future. If my children decide that they don't want to ice race when their time comes, which is sooner than I'd like, then the association won't last. It'll just be me and my husband until we can't anymore, and then nobody else will take it up, and that's kind of a bummer. We get very lucky in living in Alaska where there are areas where you can take your kids and have them practice more or less. That's one of the reasons why I love racing and why I love bringing kids into the association, because they get drive time at a really young age in the safest environment that they can be in. We've got helmets, we've got lots of safety gear, we've got fire extinguishers, they're in an armored car, they're wearing sometimes 5-point harnesses. They're in the safest location they could be for anything to go wrong. I feel like you don't get it until you get it. It seems to me like you're just putting money into something that's not really earning you anything other than a good time. But what else are you going to do on a Sunday afternoon with your whole family? What are we going to do?
Going to finish with a little bit of breaking news. The Wall Street Journal has just reported that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is expected to charge the Trump Organization and its chief financial officer with tax-related crimes on Thursday. They are citing people familiar with the matter. We'll have full details of that and all the rest of the other news tomorrow at the same time, but that's all we have on this edition of WION Live Broadcast. For more global news and updates, stay tuned to WION World is One.
There are many other...
this is right, Arab.
One World Trade Center, that is the one where the impact...
The cause of India's freedom for many years.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.